So I've been wanting to make this video for quite a while now, but it's sort of been delayed, and I've sort of just looked at it here and there, and I've changed my opinion back and forth a few times. But today I wanted to talk about things such as video game difficulty, because recently I've been playing through some AC Origins, which, for those of you who don't know, it's the first Assassin's Creed game to actually have a easy, medium, or hard difficulty setting, and I figured, why not talk about the easy, medium, or hard difficulty screens coming out, and frankly discuss gaming difficulty and just a general corpse I have about it, really. Now, Cuphead came out not too long ago. I think a lot of people played through it. The hype kind of died down a little bit, but Cuphead was one of the games iconically known for being difficult. It's a difficult game. It's one of the, as many gaming journalists put it, the Dark Souls of platformers, if you will. You know, I guess Odyssey is also the Dark Souls of plumbing third-person platformer games or anything like so. But I figured let's talk about difficult games because I've read some things online about, you know, get good and gaming being difficult and difficulty turning into ableism, that kind of crap. And frankly, there's not a whole bunch of stuff being said about it, but I figured since it's already discussed, why not at least mention it here a few times and discuss why I actually think gaming difficulty is an interesting thing to really discuss about. So, as far as I can say, let's begin it over here. What is difficult in video games, okay? So let's go all the way back to the days of the old NES platformers, if you will. Back then, gaming difficulty was very, very justified. For those of you who don't know, back then, games only consisted of like 6 or 7 levels anyways. There were entire platformers that came out, even the clone ones and even the non-clone ones, that only had like 7-10 levels at a time, right? They only had a max of that much. You know, if you looked at Castlevania, for example, Castlevania is inherently a short game. If that game wasn't difficult, if that game didn't have any difficulty curves or difficulty spikes or sections where it definitely challenged players a little more than usual, you could beat Castlevania in like less than an hour, maybe an hour, a little bit more than that, if depending on your, you know, play style. But the reason why that game took a little longer or pushed people away was because it was difficult. A lot of platformers of that era were incredibly difficult for that reason. They couldn't make games long. They didn't have the technical capabilities to, but they could make games difficult. And by making games difficult, they were more than just a quick rental. People bought them, people spent hours upon hours on them and tried to finish them. That's how they padded out their games. And was it an amazing thing to do? To an extent, yes and no. While it did definitely make some form of accomplishment, for me, I never beat a lot of platformers in that era myself just because they were too difficult. I didn't bother with them, I switched to other games. I started playing more story-driven games like RPGs, and, you know, those are games that showed up later on, and that's where my gaming primarily went to. And in a way, it shifted me to that focus anyways. When I played Metal Gear again, it had a difficulty screen anyways. Back in the day, a lot of games came out with difficulty screens too. And I think a lot of story-focused games essentially pull that stuff off anyways. See, as gaming got more technically possible, you know, where you could make story-driven games, you could make games that were 8 to 10 hours in pure content, not difficult. You know, they weren't padded out by difficulty, they actually had 8 to 10 hours of content. Nowadays, you have games with 60, 70, hundreds of hours of content, and you have difficulty modifiers applying to them as well. You know, any game you play, it comes with easy, medium, hard. Sometimes it comes with something a little harder than that, or a developer can be really shitty and sell you a difficulty mode if they so choose. But you get a difficulty selection anyways, and since the dawn of difficulty selections, it's always been the same thing. Sometimes it comes down to, at the very minimum, it basically means you do more damage, they give you less damage, all that kind of stuff. Enemies have less health. Sometimes when you're playing a very specific game, like a stealth-focused game, the enemy's perception might be horrible. You know, you play through Metal Gear Solid 3, if you set the game to a higher difficulty, the enemies can hear your footsteps from a fucking, you know, 2 time zones over, okay? That's how it fucking works. Have you played MGS3? Seen how perceptive these fucking guards are when you set them to hard difficulty, dude? You could piss on a ladybug, you know, in China, and the dudes from fucking, you know, Tokyo would hear you out and be like, what was that noise? That's how it works. Playing through any of these, any of the Assassin's Creed Origins playthroughs I've seen, where you go from easy to hard, it's all the same shit. The enemies just do different buffs of damage. You know, you play through Manhunt, it adds a little bit more into difficulty as well. Manhunt is a game where not only is the damage modifiers changed, but they actually get rid of a map screen for you. So the one little advantage you had over the enemies are gone. You're about the same level as them anyways. It just adds to the level of intensity. A game like Dark Souls or Bloodborne doesn't really have a difficulty selection screen. At one core phase, it's a difficult game. You can make it harder or easier depending on certain items you use, certain covenants you join, or depending on who you summon, how you summon, what you summon in particular, or what your play style is. There's a certain way to play these games, and it's very similar to games back in the day. I was looking at Cuphead and Dark Souls, and a lot of people consider Dark Souls and Cuphead to be inherently difficult games. And I've looked at them and said, no, they're very similar to games back in the day. While they also had that level of content, they follow the play styles of classic games. Look at something like Dark Souls, for example. It has the same stuff that you've seen in platformer games of the NES era. Wind-up times, iframes, playing a level a certain way to win. If you ever played the classic Mega Man games, you know that there's always the traditional route you follow in every game. You go through one boss, you get their ability, you go to the next boss, use the ability you just gained to exploit a weakness, and so on and so forth. Dark Souls is a similar experience. While yes, there are multiple ways to build a character and play it, you realize that at certain bosses or certain locations, there is a set way you should play the game in order to beat it in a way. You could technically face roll your way through Dark Souls, but that's by abusing the game's leveling system and getting maybe 50 levels higher than usual so that you can actually just tank your way through all of the bullshit in that stage. Cuphead is a game where I haven't played it myself, but as far as I know how it goes, there are certain upgrade paths you can follow. But there's no leveling system entirely in it. It's really, you get a few upgrades, but at the end of the day, it comes down to how you play a platformer and what you have to do. And if you're following the norms you really have to do, if you're memorizing the levels and basically playing them down to a T, you won't be beating the game anytime soon. And that's very, again, similar to games of old days. Comparing it to a lot of difficulty selection screens I have nowadays too, playing something like, say, Diablo 3, where you have multiple difficulty screens going all the way up to different bouts of a torment difficulty that just changes the game entirely to the point where it can be ball-crunchingly difficult, is one of those where really only percentages change. You get a percentage difference in damage done or damage, dealt or things like that, and that's where that very early sort of hint of difficulty comes down to. A lot of RPG games have a different difficulty selection screen anyways, easy, medium, or hard. And really, if you're playing a JRPG and setting a difficulty to hard, it just means the RNG system is more geared to work against you. It's all just different percentages and sliders that are against you anyways. Now, the entire argument I see over here, too, is that a lot of people just don't like difficult games because they exclude people from playing the game. It creates this mentality of get good players, and I think if anybody's to compare anything to that, it's the Dark Souls community. There's a very minor toxic part of that community that really likes to toss the get good mentality. You're not a real gamer unless you've beaten Dark Souls or things like that. And it just perpetrates it when a hard game actually comes out. There's people who are really against them. There's people who consider themselves to be hardcore gamers versus the normie, filthy, casual crowd. And I don't agree with that anyways. I think if you play games, you play games, whether it be Farmville or, whether it be, something, casual like Call of Duty or something as intense and pulse pounding as Rainbow Six Siege, you're still a gamer, regardless of how difficult you play your games. I was a gamer that never really was into the super difficult ball testicle crunching games. I was always one of those that were in for just having a good time playing video games, and that being that. Nothing else, nothing more. And I never agreed with the get good mentality. But I realize that from a developer's point of view that you can't always make a difficult game. Nowadays, like I said, games are 60, 70, 100-hour long experiences. Have you ever actually read how many people finish, let's say, a Call of Duty campaign, one of the easiest campaigns to really get yourself through, a popcorn shooter, if you will? Not a lot of people work themselves through a game like that, even today, no matter how easy it is. Now, of course, that could be gained from the fact that Call of Duty is really just a multiplayer game with a campaign sometimes, but a lot of people just don't go into it because they either don't have the time to do it or it's just not their cup of tea. So, for example, if you build a hard game, for a lot of people who just don't have the time or the energy to finish a difficult game, you're essentially losing millions upon millions of dollars by creating a difficult game that nobody wants to play, that nobody has interest for. There's only a very few developers who really do that, and that is their niche, which is From Software, for example, who prides themselves on making a game that offers a challenge. Fair, but a challenge. And a lot of people love it. There is that niche that's carved. But for a lot of mainstream games that are out there, you can't really pop difficulty into them and expect these developers to sort of get away with it and make a profitable product. If you make a game like, let's say, Shadow of the Colossus, and you make it incredibly difficult, something that completely turns away the casual crowd from gaming it entirely, then nobody wants to sit down and play it, and that loses sales for them. And a lot of people definitely do get pissed, because nowadays when I play a lot of these games that are in the mainstream side, that yeah, I play them because I'm a longtime gamer of them, longtime fan, something like, say, Mass Effect or something of the sort, there was a challenge at one point to it, a classic RPG challenge from it. Nowadays that's all eliminated. Nowadays you have these absolutely generous regenerative health systems. You have checkpointing up the ass. You have all these systems that are designed to make sure you don't feel any discouragement from dying whatsoever. You know, playing through Resident Evil 7, again, I play through that game on multiple difficulties, whether it was easy, normal, or Madhouse. And normal difficulty was the most generous difficulty I've ever seen. Dying in Resident Evil 7 didn't mean much. Dying in, let's say, Resident Evil 1 meant a fair bit. Unless you hadn't saved maybe like 5 minutes ago, you lost a fair bit of progress. In RE7, unless you go to Madhouse difficulty, you don't really feel any form of threat or danger. Playing on normal, you get checkpointed every 2 minutes, and the game essentially becomes not scary. You just realize that, oh, I died? Well, I'll just be back 2 minutes later, so no big harm done. And I guess for some people, for a grand majority, that is a good thing, because at least that means they can finish their games and it doesn't feel as exclusionary or requiring you to get good, as some people say, pretty quickly over time or anything of the sort. But I wanted to ask you all what you think about difficult, hard, or brutally face-beating games, and just see what the community really thinks about it entirely. I like difficult games. I like games with a challenge. Of course, a challenge can mean a lot different than a game that completely slaps you across the face silly and just it completely turns you off. But I wanted to discuss what people think about gaming nowadays and just how easy in general most games are, and if that's really a good thing, and at the same time if the inverse is really good either. Is having a difficult game just for being difficult good, or should there be a good happy medium? Let me know what you think about it. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it. This is the ramblings of a internet moron. This is me, Mudahar, and I am out.